It's my pleasure to welcome you all to the first webinar in the series called Scaling and Innovating for Social Transformation in International Food Systems. My name is Erin McGuire, and I work at the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Horticulture. I'm the Associate Director there, and I will be leading and organizing the series, but we're working in collaboration with Wageningen University Research and colleagues within the CGIAR. Which is the consultative group for international agriculture research. We have participants joining us from all over the world, and we're delighted to have such a diverse audience with us today. Please take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat box. You're welcome to provide your name, country, university, etc., and any other interesting facts you might want to share. Our first webinar is titled Introduction to Scaling and Development in Agriculture, and we are joined by Leonard Woltering, who will be sharing his expertise on the topic as well. Before we begin, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items. First and foremost, please be aware that this meeting is being recorded for our colleagues to watch afterward. Secondly, we encourage you to use the chat box for any comments you might have, side conversations, or questions during the talk. Many of you are experts in your own right on these topics, and we welcome your insight. And additionally, we will be providing about 15 minutes at the end of the hour for a moderated Q&A. There will also be a poll at the end of the webinar, and we encourage you to participate. This is a pilot course. It's the first time we're running it. And if you're not familiar with pilot, you will be very shortly. Leonard will make sure of that. We hope to institutionalize this course over the years, and these data you can provide us would be very helpful in that effort. So thank you again for joining us, and we hope you find the webinar informative and engaging. This is part of a series as well as a class, which I will explain a bit more in a second. This webinar series flows through the basics of scaling and systems transformation to social differentiation and scaling, introduction to innovation systems, and finally, innovating for social transformation. If you would like to learn more about the webinar series, my colleague Heather will provide a link in the chat box that you can access anytime. And this has been a true team effort. We've put this together in a short amount of time, and I want to acknowledge and introduce Kristen Becker, a graduate student researcher with UC Davis, who will be assisting in the webinar and class, and Heather Hayashi, our communications manager. Please wave. They have both been a huge help, and I'm sure will continue to facilitate and assist the successful and smooth running of this webinar. So the goal of the webinar series in class, it's an introduction to scaling and development in agriculture, including models of innovation, development, and scaling. We will be looking at social differentiation in scaling and its impact, and on the scaling tool Gender Up. We will do an introduction to agriculture innovation systems and representation of different groups, such as Indigenous communities, women, and people of color within those innovation systems. And we will be talking about innovating for social transformation, including presentation of frameworks for innovation and identifying points of leverage. The class will also do these things, but ultimately the objective of this research working group is to build the foundation of a tool that helps researchers develop and curate innovation with social differentiation in mind. So that is happening before we start scaling an innovation. It's considering social differentiation from the very innovation step. So we will do this through understanding current scaling and innovation strategies, critically analyzing them, and identifying points of leverage for social change. Ultimately, participants of the class and working group will present conceptual frameworks that will serve as the foundation of a method for innovating for social transformation. So logistically, this is what it will look like. Originally, this was just meant to be a class, but many people, due to the time zone, we are working very collaboratively with WR, like I said, also people from around the CG, universities globally. They were only able to participate in the lectures and not fully in the class. And so to accommodate this, we opened the first 4 classes to students to attend just the lecture. We have some of our most prominent speakers. It's when we cover most of the course material before we really dive into the discussion. So once we decided to allow that, it was just a small amount of extra work to allow for a broader community of practice to participate in the series. So for the first 4 weeks, there will be a lecture that is open to the public for the first hour. So these are California times. And though the webinar series will last from February 21st to March 14th, the class itself will have discussions and a deeper dive into the material for the second hour for the first 4 classes. There will be a new Zoom link for the class participants to join, which is in your calendar invite and will be provided at the end of this hour. The class runs from February 21st to April 11th. And in the second hour, we will go over more of the syllabus and class logistics. So the diversity statement is from the syllabus, but I want to highlight it for all of the participants on this call. While we strive for objectivity in scholarship, much of our learning is influenced by subjectivity and perspectives built from a small subset of voices who are in power. We have many well-known authors on our syllabus who also will be lecturing, and we will continue to add to the diversity of perspectives as the course evolves. As participants, we encourage you to critically analyze the positions presented by each author and pay attention to what is omitted, who is excluded or missing from the conversation. This course centers around social equity, diversity, inclusion, and a look towards social transformation. And we want to represent that in our syllabus. And so we encourage, if you have ideas, papers, lectures, etc., please send them to me and we will look into including them in another version of the class. So on that note, because our social experiences and where we come from is so central to this course, I want to give a brief background on where I come from and how this class got situated. I am the Associate Director of the Horticulture Innovation Lab. As I mentioned, we focus on developing innovations for small-scale farmers in East and West Africa, South Asia, and Central America. We generally have about 10 to 20 projects going at any time, ranging from biophysical or social science efforts, all within fruits and vegetables. We are funded by the United States Agency on International Development. And I've been with the organization for about 6 years. And in my time managing research projects, I noticed that a lot of the innovations developed in California, where I am, or in other well-funded research universities, et cetera, generally not where the innovations were meant to be used. They often had a series of challenges moving from the lab to the field in a successful manner. And even if they did work in the field, they sometimes didn't accomplish what they set out to. So this really motivated me to begin my own research around effective innovation systems, more local-led research, and the distribution of benefits and innovation. In this pursuit, I was very lucky to be linked up with Case Lewis and Anne Retveld from Wageningen University and the CG, and they will be speakers in this class as well, who are working on understanding social differentiation and its impacts on scaling. So we have been working together now for the past 3 years to develop a tool called Gender Up that helps researchers consider intersectionality and social experiences when scaling. And we'll talk a lot about that in the next class, in the next webinar series. This includes anticipating negative consequences and providing additional mitigating activities so that marginalized populations can reap the benefits of innovation as well. It's from this work around social differentiation and scaling that this class was born. In this space, in this class, we hope to take a step further in thinking about social outcomes. And instead of thinking about them only when we start scaling an already developed innovation, we want to start thinking about how we innovate for social transformation itself. So with that, I would like to introduce my co-speaker today, Leonard Woltering, who will be giving most of the talk on scaling today after I give brief introduction on the concepts. But Leonard Woltering is helping colleagues achieve more and lasting impact with their work by finding practical applications for complex theories on scaling. He has been able to support project teams in formulating scaling ambitions, help provide clarity on what an enabling environment for an innovation means, and create a realistic picture of what a project can and cannot address, and where strategic collaboration is required to exert influence. I had the pleasure of spending some time with Leonard in Nairobi in November, I believe. And it was really great to meet Leonard and hear some of his ideas. And I'm very excited to listen and learn from him today as well. Leonard, you want to say hello? There you are. Hi.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, it's a whole mouthful there, but I hope I can live up to that. Thank you so much, Erin.
Yeah, of course. So today I'll be just setting the stage a little bit through talking about sustainable development goals, the importance of small scale farming. And then we will talk about background concepts within responsible research and innovation, gender responsive research, and the science of scaling. And then Leonard will really give the main body of the talk around scaling and systems transformation contextualized. And we'll end our talk on who is benefiting and what is missing. So just briefly, as we begin here, the Sustainable Development Goals, of the 17, 10 of them mention vulnerable populations directly. And almost all of them focus on how to equitably achieve sustainability. So we are really, as an international development community, striving towards social goals. We want to end poverty in all its forms everywhere that we 100% know is finances are inequitably distributed. We want to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls, and we want to reduce inequality within and among countries. So generally, within this context of this class, we're talking about using agriculture innovation as a means to achieve these social goals. And we aren't going to be able to be effective agriculture research for development actors without understanding how our innovations affect different groups of people. And this, of course, are the Sustainable Development Goals, but this runs through CGIAR targets, as well as USAID and many other large institutions. So small-scale farming is a really important mechanism in order to make change within these goals. The UN estimates that small-scale farmers produce over 70% of the world's food, and the FAO estimates that there are around 500 million small-scale farmers worldwide. Most of them are in Africa, South Asia, Central America, and Latin America, as many farmers in the US, Europe, et cetera, have more centralized, larger farming systems. In sub-Saharan Africa, small-scale farmers account for 90% of all farms and produce up to 80% of the region's food. So it is incredibly important to support these farmers, and it makes sense to act within these communities to make change around social equity goals. Specifically, women represent approximately 43% of the agricultural labor force in developing countries. In sub-Saharan Africa, women represent about 50% of the agricultural labor force and produce up to 80% of the food crops. However, women own less than 20% of the land in some countries, and in some countries, they are legally prohibited from owning and inheriting land. Only 10 to 20% of agricultural extension services are specifically designed to reach women farmers, and women-led farmers tend to have lower yields and productivity due to structural barriers. So while we have an incredibly robust small-scale farming community globally, particularly in West particularly within West and East Africa, South Asia, and Central and Latin America. We also see women representing half this population, although they are often have many more challenges to overcome in order to get the same benefits from that small scale agriculture. So this is just to set the stage a little bit in the space that we're operating. Now I'm going to lay out a couple of our basic concepts in the literature that is foundational to where we're going within this webinar series and the class. So in scaling and innovating for social differentiation, we're standing on responsible research and innovation literature. We're standing on gender responsive research and the science of scaling. And when we blend those all together, we get responsible and effective scaling, where we will spend a lot of our time discussing. But first, I'll just talk a bit about responsible research and innovation. This body of literature came about with big tech, big innovation that was exciting in its time, but we have seen as it comes to pass to have negative consequences globally or within certain social communities. So RRI promotes socially desirable, inclusive, sustainable science and innovation. It focuses on including and engaging diverse stakeholders throughout the research process. And research is carried out ethically and with integrity, in theory. It works towards creating more inclusive and sustainable outcomes. It also introduces a concept of anticipatory analysis or ex ante analysis. So thinking through how an innovation might affect communities or the global community at large. The development of RRI emerged as a response to critiques of the traditional model of science and innovation that prioritized commercial interests over social and environmental interests. So this is an example that we can look at towards the future when considering RRI, responsible research and innovation literature. Precision agriculture technologies use data-driven tools such as sensors, GPS mapping, and drones to monitor and manage crops. And these technologies can lead to more efficient use of resources, increased yields, reduced environmental impact. However, the deployment of precision agriculture raises some ethical and social concerns related to the potential impact on smallholder farmers, data privacy, and the potential for technology-driven agriculture to exacerbate existing social inequities. So, an RRI approach to the development and deployment of precision agriculture would be to engage different stakeholders, including smallholder farmers, around data privacy, and representatives from marginalized communities. For example, an RRI approach to the development and deployment of precision agriculture technologies would involve engaging with smallholder farmers to ensure that the technology benefits them and does not result in further marginalization. It also would involve engaging representatives around the best way to deploy and be inclusive within these groups of people in order to benefit across the board and not just people who can afford precision agriculture technologies. Responsible research and innovation, I would say, is now very well accepted and is being used in many government systems. There are challenges to implementing responsible research and innovation that's been highlighted within the research. And I will highlight them here as well because we run into a lot of these same issues when we consider responsible scaling and also innovating for social transformation. There is often a lack of consensus and definition within the scope. It's complex and multidisciplinary in nature, has a lot of different stakeholders at the table, including researchers, policymakers, industry, civil society organizations, and the public. This complexity, although necessary, because there's so many people that have a stake in many of these different technologies, can be difficult to manage. There's also limited resources and capacity. Sometimes it takes longer to engage in these types of processes where you have to go out into the field, collect more data, have more key informant interviews, et cetera. And often funders want to see quicker results. Often an organization doesn't want to go through the time and processes to be as thorough. And there can be a resistance to change. The implementation of RRI requires significant changes to significant research practices and cultures. So I've given you a brief overview, but here are other works cited on responsible research and innovation literature. And you all will have a copy of this presentation, and you're welcome to dive deeper into this topic. So responsible research and innovation is important and introduces good concepts. And then we mix that with gender responsive research. Gender responsive research is an approach that recognizes that gender biases can affect research outcomes, and that addressing these biases can lead to better and more equitable research. So it's taking that responsible research and innovation lens and applying social differentiation to it. It involves consider gender and other social factors at every stage of the research process, including design, data collection, analysis, and dissemination. One thing that gender responsive research really adds to the conversation is that we are looking at ourselves as researchers as well as the subjects of our studies. It also aims to ensure that research is conducted ethically and with sensitivity to power imbalances that may arise due to gender and other social factors. So this is an example from Kenya's informal dairy sector from a paper, Alessandra et al., Gendered Barriers and Opportunities in Kenya's Informal Dairy Sector. These findings indicate that milk trading is more profitable for older men compared to women and younger men among the respondents. It highlights the differences in the experiences of women and men as milk traders in the same system, and delves into the underlying reasons behind these differences. The article also explains the implications of the findings and how it might be rectified. So you can see here on the left-hand side all the different ways that the experience of being women and young men milk traders are compared to older men milk traders. And as you go through the list here, you can see that eventually young men transition into older men and are able to reap the benefits from the social standing of being an older man within this community, except for while women will continue to be women and be not as profitable in their businesses. And we will talk a lot more about these types of social differences within the same communities. So gender responsive research is increasingly being integrated into research policy and funding, with some funders requiring these types of analyses. It involves ensuring that research teams are diverse and inclusive, and it has the potential to lead to more accurate and relevant research outcomes as we stride towards sustainable development goals. And again, here's a list of works cited that you can dive more deeply into. So finally, the science of scaling, before I hand it over to Leonard, these are some of the big concepts within this body of literature that we draw upon, and we'll be talking a lot more about in this class. So scaling pathways are the different pathways that organizations can take to scale their intervention. Contextualization is adapting interventions or innovations to local contexts. Sustainability is ensuring that scaled interventions or innovations are financially, socially, and environmentally sustainable in the long term. Monitoring and evaluation notes the progress of scaling. Partnership and collaboration has emerged as an extremely important aspect of scaling, of successful scaling, whether it be with governments, communities, universities, etc. It also has talked a lot about systems thinking, which Leonard will dive more into, making sure that you have all the players that you need in multi-different sectors to achieve your goal in scaling. And then finally, innovation bundling has emerged as very prominent and essentially gets to the idea that while we try to scale a core innovation, you very often need wraparound innovations in order to make that innovation successful. And the theory is, and again, we'll talk more about this, is that when you introduce an innovation, it will have a certain impact in a community that will make progress towards some sort of development or social outcome. So it might be increasing nutrition, income, etc. Your innovation will help drive that change. And as more people use the innovation, you will see greater change. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Leonard to really dive into this subject.
Yeah, thanks, Erin. This was very captivating. I was like, okay, you just go on. It's very nice to listen to you. But thanks, Erin, and everyone for inviting me and listening here. It's really great to be part of this series and kicking it off. So yes, I will speak about scaling and a bit of the experience that I have from a research organization point of view, the CGIAR. I work for CIMMYT, that's the Maize and Wheat Improvement Center. And we are working a lot on different kind of seeds and other technologies. So how do we come across scaling? How do we work with scaling? So first step in this research for development continuum that is quite dominant in our world is you have a discovery of something. And if you click next, please. Then you do a proof of concept, you try it out. Next, please. Yeah, it's going to be quite a few clicks, Erin. Sorry for that. You go for piloting, and then after the piloting, the next obvious step is to go for scaling, where whatever we piloted there is going to work on a much bigger scale. Next, please. Okay, I think there was something missing there. One of the issues there is actually that we don't really know what is actually going on between the piloting and the scaling phase. And the other thing is there that, okay, we apply scaling, a big solution for a big problem. So during this lecture or presentation, I will come back a little bit to the issue of land degradation. So this is a map where all the land degradation is happening, big problem. So the next slide, please. The response is often, okay, then we need a big solution. So we need to scale something that has proven its value on a very smaller scale. So then the idea is, okay, if people just adopt more of, for example, here, this kind of technology where you have, where you basically guide the water away from your field, then you basically solve the big problem as well. Now, then I found this figure, which was kind of hard actually to find. You find a lot of figures where you see adoption during the project, and you see here 10-year project in Honduras, and you see the line going up. So everybody happy, and we have great adoption during the project. Next, please. But what was interesting about this one is that actually researchers started to look actually what happens after the project ends, which was the difficult part because you don't hardly see those figures. And you see that actually the adoption quickly goes down. And you see that in the majority, the large majority of projects that, next, please. That those projects do not really scale up, or they really fade out after the funding ends, which you can really see here. So this is a problem that you see basically all over the world in many different sectors, not only in agriculture, but in many different sectors as well. Next, please. So then actually raises the question, that idea of, okay, just having more during that project and having more, is it actually just that? Is it just having more of something? Next, please. As I said, there is this piloting to scaling black box. We don't really know what's going on. How do you go from a successful pilot to something at scale? And the idea that a lot of people say, well, pilots never fail, pilots never scale. We have so many fantastic projects, but actually at scale, very little. But I also want to talk today about a second black box. And if you can click, please. And that's after that one is that sometimes things can go to scale, but it doesn't mean that it's actually sustainable development or that it is a sustainable change at scale. So you have these two black boxes, and I will go through each one of them today. So next, please. About the black box between piloting and scaling, we learned really quite a lot, I would say. And there's a lot of knowledge available nowadays, especially in the last 10 years. I think a lot has been learned. I will just go into three major issues there, three major lessons actually. That is that successful pilots are no guarantee for success at scale. It's really about the context, also about the multiple innovations, and then the skills and capacities. So if you can go to the next, please. So one of the big issues is that most of the pilots or the projects that we have been implementing are quite different from the real conditions that are there at scale. Our projects operate in very controlled environments. So I think you can just click a few times through this one, Erin, sorry. So it's very quite controlled environments. There's strong leadership managed by external experts, people coming in for specific projects. They set up their offices often in parallel to local systems. There's also a lot of support for partnerships, often very transactional. We pay you money to do this. A lot of focus on capacity strengthening and unsustainable grants. So you have maybe funding for 3 years or 2 years from this date to that date, which may not always match, let's say, with an agricultural calendar or with other things that are important locally, right? Next, please. Yeah. And last but not least, often these projects, or actually all of these projects, are very much shielded from politics, markets, etc. I mean, you come there with your beautiful white car with maybe an American flag on it. It's a different story than, you know, in the real world conditions. So it feels a little bit like this beautiful fish doing very well in the protected environment. And if you click next, please. And you then basically say, okay, well, this pilot is over, let's go to the real world. And then you suddenly get confronted with all the kind of dangers of the real world and a little bit more salty water, probably. I'm not sure if there's another joke in there hidden, but if you can click. Thank you. With that, actually, that idea that a pilot or a project is a very controlled environment, we still have a lot of projects that get funding, and people are thinking in a way that, okay, from there, we just go to the real world, or we go to scale using two very common scaling strategies. The first is, click please. Basically, scaling is a bigger project. So you basically say, okay, we're just going to expand this controlled environment, right? Which is of course very expensive. And again, you basically create more of that situation. And the second strategy, which has been very common as well, is to say, well, this works so nicely. Look at this, how fantastic this is working. We just pull our hands off and that's it. Somebody else will scale it for us, no? And those two strategies actually don't work. One of the lessons there is that a successful pilot is really no guarantee for success at scale. So whatever we're doing in the pilot and just saying, okay, this can then also happen at scale, doesn't really work. Next, please. One of the other way of saying that is that actually context is king. And together with Maria, I think she's going to present in a few weeks as well, we made a nice little article about this. It's really saying, okay, don't scale up, but get down to earth. And you see there perfect conditions, everything very nice, everybody happy, drones flying, money is rolling, everything looks very nice, fenced conditions, but the reality on the ground actually looks quite different. So we sometimes have very parallel worlds coming together. Now, the second important issue or learning, I think that really is getting mainstreamed much more, is that it's not just about one innovation. And I think there's one very nice example to illustrate that, is that, okay, the electrical vehicles, it was always an issue of, okay, can the battery take it more than 40 kilometers? Yes, now it can, but that's not the only innovation that was required, right? It was also very much an infrastructural innovation. Do you connect your charging stations to existing fuel stations? Do they want that? So there are also people really breaking their heads around all of these issues, design innovation. If you see the first electrical car, it looked like no, not so sexy as the ones of today, right? And then a lot of other innovations by very different people that may have never met each other, right? The political innovations, etc. Next, please. So these innovations all need to kind of somehow scale in parallel. It takes time and resources, right? So it's not just about, let's say, fixing the battery and then the electrical vehicle goes. Next one, please. A third important lesson is, I think, the realization that scaling requires very different roles and skills as bringing us a project to a successful completion, right? If you can go next, because I think I see I made the animations wrong there. If you go next, yes. So, I mean, I saw that there are some Dutch people here in the group, and you see here our beloved queen on the bicycle. You see she's driving her bike on the grass. And if you think in terms of scaling, yes, she could carry more people. If you see the other lady on her bicycle, but if you want to carry more, you have to change vehicles, right? You have to change from a bicycle to a car. You cannot drive on the grass anymore. You may need to learn how to drive. You need a driver's license, although I'm not sure if that guy has a driver's license. There are different rules and regulations. There are different ways of how the things work that come with this kind of scaling processes. And then if you can imagine moving even bigger, you have to learn how to drive a bus. So scaling is not a linear process. It really requires different roles, responsibilities with you and your team. And we see that a lot where maybe in beginning of the stages, people were very technical people are working on the project. In our case, agronomists, for example, right? Okay, is this plant higher than that one, more flowers, whatnot? That gets less important if you continue with the scaling. Well, that's not true. So you need other multiple additional skills in that scaling journey, where maybe you need to go really look at how does a financing work without a project. Maybe you're looking around issues of advocacy, communication, behavior change, all these kind of different things that are getting more and more important when you operate at a different scale. Yes, thanks. These three lessons, we thought, okay, this is actually quite interesting, but they're not maybe very well known or not maybe used all together. So together with a group from the Netherlands, which actually included also Wageningen indirectly, we said, okay, isn't there another way to convey these lessons in a very simple way? So we came up with a scaling scan tool. I think you saw a link also to that, to trying it out yourself. I don't know if you had a chance to do that, but basically it is really about conveying three very simple lessons around scaling, and not much more than that as well. It's also a scan. So it is about scaling the context. It's about this idea of the core and the supporting innovations, the idea of the electrical vehicle, and also what Erin was saying about bundles of innovations. And then the importance of the role in collaboration. Next, please. And the idea that it has to be user-friendly, rapid, and accessible. Because one of the things that I realized when we started this work is that a lot of the knowledge is very theoretical, very academic, very difficult to understand by the people that actually are affected most by scaling. Because if you scale something, you have quite a change in the lives of the people, which are often in the global south, and they're not always part of the discussions around scaling or making decisions around scaling. So it became also something that, was decided and understood maybe at the top of the chain. So one of the motivations for the scaling scan, to make it as simple and accessible as possible, was to have local actors, for example, local here because now I'm in Ethiopia, but actors that are really affected by this understand scaling and discuss scaling with those project managers or those academics or those other people that are really trying to push things through their system, right? So thank you. So just as a very briefly what it is again, thinking about scale in the context. It's not about scaling and innovation. It's about scaling and innovation in a context. So it's really about, okay, where are you? Let's say if you say a two-wheel tractor or something, right? Yeah, it matters if it's in Ethiopia or it's in Bangladesh, right? It matters if you're targeting women groups or if you're targeting, let's say, relatively rich men. So really the context is very, very important. So it's not so much about, can this thing go to scale? No. Can this innovation in this context, can that go to scale? And then we said, okay, how do we simplify this idea of that you actually need multiple innovations for this to go to scale? So we found that there are actually 10 ingredients that come back every time in every scaling journey that we came across. That is, you have to have a good technology or a practice or an innovation. And there's a lot of the Rogers thinking in there. It has to be better than alternatives, etc. But there are many other ingredients that are required that are maybe not so much related to the technology per se, but really around the context. So looking at, is there an awareness and a demand for the innovation? Are there business models for it? Is there finance for it? But also, is there leadership for reaching that scaling ambition? So these are the kind of the 10 ingredients that we put there. And then we basically ask people, okay, can you score how well you're doing towards these ingredients to have a sense of the enabling environment for scaling? And then in the third step, you kind of look at where actually are your strong and where are your weak ingredients. And in our case, from a very technical perspective in terms of the CGIAR, often people realize that, okay, we have been tweaking a lot the innovation and technology, making it a little bit better, doing this, doing that. But there are huge gaps in terms of finance or business models that are just not there. So it's kind of like the barrel is leaking there where you're actually not paying any attention. So can you do something about it? Yes or not? Can you do something about it through collaboration? Maybe that's something that you need to look at. So it's a very simple way of conveying these three lessons about the context, the other kinds of innovations, and then actually what you can do and how collaboration is key. Next, please. So looking at those lessons, what are actually implications for projects? So one is that you have to pilot as much in the real world conditions as possible. So the more you make it into kind of like a project with all these kind of criteria that I said before, the more you're actually detached from the reality, right? And I would argue also that maybe if you go to the next, if you click once more. Yeah, so I would argue here for a phase between the piloting and the scaling, but really pilot the scaling. So pilot, how can you finance, for example, this at scale and see that as part of the project? Not only look at, does this innovation work? Do you actually get more yield or the other preferences? Is it better than what is there? No, but also, can this be sustained on the long term? Is there collaboration models that you can test? Are there finance models that you can also test? So not only about does it work or not, but also testing out some other things. Thanks. Now, let's go to the second black box. We just talked now about how you get from piloting to scaling and the learnings around that. But there's another black box after scaling, right? And we see that actually there's been a lot of maybe scaling successes that actually stayed very isolated and really didn't lead to the change that we wanted to see. Next, please. So yeah, I think you can go next until all the pictures are here. Exactly. So what we realize is that actually the way that we do our projects is very focused around, okay, so many beneficiaries are adopting this by the end of the year. And what you actually have, then you have the system or the environment, the society just moving on, and we do our project very isolated from that in the fenced conditions. And there are some changes in there, but it doesn't really affect the system. So really going back to the idea that we're doing a project to change the system or the way that things have been going. Bringing that idea back, maybe next slide. you would call that maybe a systems approach to scaling, which you refocus a bit on actually why are we scaling? And it's not so much then about, yeah, we just want more of this innovation. No, we want actually good change, right? And then you get into a kind of like a new or a different way of different discipline, if you want to call it, which is about systems change, which basically is about lasting change by altering some of these underlying structures and supporting mechanisms, policies, routines, relationships, etc., which make the system operate in a particular way. This sounds like super fluffy. It is also a little bit, so I'll try to spend a few slides on that. Hope it gets better. I don't promise anything there, but so one of the problems I think in our way of treating issues is that we treat them very much as very linear problems, right? You have a flat tire, you fix it, it's over. But many of the problems that we're dealing with, if you click to the next things, are actually very wicked and complex problems. If you just talk again about land degradation, it has agricultural elements in it, but also economy, the environmental issues are there, society, governance. It's super complex things come together. It's not just like fixing a tire, right? So the kind of stuff that we are dealing with, what Aaron was saying, poverty, sustainable development goals, they're very, very, very systemic in nature. They're all systems problems, but we tend to treat them like fixing a tire, right? Like we bring a solution and that will fix the problem. So one of the, I think, most interesting elements of systems thinking, if thinking in that way about our world, is that the problem actually is a result of a system working perfectly well. And you see that all the time. We try to make a change, we do something, like we try to roll up this ball up on the hill, we leave, and the project just goes back to the situation it was, right? The system is actually not really supporting ourselves, right? As we just don't do anything now, the soil is 100 times lost 100 times faster than it builds, right? If, again, talking about soil degradation. So we're actually on that hill where if you don't do anything, the things actually are going down. So through project, we sometimes try to stop the ball, but yeah, it actually eventually will roll down again. Next, please. We looked at the example in Central America and trying to understand degradation there by using a very, very simple, but I think very powerful systems thinking tool, which is the iceberg. And basically the idea is that you see the tip of an iceberg and 90% of it is underwater. If you address an event, in this case, let's say a problem, it's like chopping off the top of that iceberg. Because of the buoyancy, the thing will float up again. You just get a new top, right? The problem reappears again. So looking at land degradation, in this case, I think it was El Salvador, Honduras. If you click on the next area, maybe, you say, okay, the fact that land degradation is happening is, well, there's a lot of underinvestment in R&D. There's actually no or very insecure land tenure. Policies are designed to give away natural resources. They sell it, for example, to foreign companies. That's the structural issues, really the things kind of tangible. But there's also very much mental models that actually feed those structures, because there's a sense of, well, agriculture is basically about exploitation, getting as much from your land in a short time as possible. It's about consumption, getting as much out of that again, and in economic inequality in Honduras, where you just basically look at, well, rural people and urban people like, well, you just have to give us what you need, right? So if you then want to go to land restoration, next slide, please. If maybe you just click on, and then it's maybe a bit easier, where you see, you know, the land is restored from all this degradation. Our approach is often you plant trees, or you do some ditches, or what you saw on the first slide, right? You do those kind of measures. But that's very superficial, right? Because you're not addressing actually the deeper roots why that problem is there. So in that work that we did with Catholic Relief Service, they looked at, okay, we actually have to start with the mental models. So they worked a lot on working with youth groups, linking social also with environmental degradation. They did that actually quite a lot through the church. and then said, okay, well, maybe this is interesting for us. And the youth started to make their own kind of multi-stakeholder platforms and community governance models there, where they then brought in other stakeholders. And that then led to the land degradation, which is in that sense a much more sustainable pathway than just going straight from, planting trees there. So you basically take like an U shape. You go down the iceberg to come to a better solution. Next, please.
And Leonard, I just want to let you know that if it's possible, we could take questions in maybe 4 or 5 minutes. I know that I took more time than I expected. So
No, that's great. I already had in mind a few that we could skip. So
okay.
if you go to the next one. So one of those things is that systems enable scaling of innovation. So maybe next one. There's a nice article about chickpea in Ethiopia where basically the scaling was super easy because the enabling conditions were all there. So if you have a good system, the scaling is also very much easy. Next slide, please. But also the other way around, scaling can also change systems. And I think this is on the right, there's a nice picture of work from Wageningen, and it's saying, okay, if something scales up, other things may scale down. And the idea, an extension of what Aaron, you were saying about responsible scaling, right? So it's not always good per se. Agriculture is the biggest polluter of water resources. It's the biggest reason for loss of biodiversity. So it also comes with a lot of environmental, but also social issues. Next, please. So scaling can change systems. And I think there we need to really look at how do you move from a project to a local process. There, the idea of end users defining what is good, the idea of responsible scaling, but also nurturing the local ownership and leadership. And if you look at this is going to be a big change. Also have to anticipate maybe winners and losers, right? Incentives and disincentives for stakeholders to support this. And also the idea that, we can scale all we want. We as maybe projects or foreigners are coming into a country, but it's really about the local private and public sector that can really sustain and further grow whatever we have been doing, right? Or they have been doing together with them. So next slide, please. One major issue is that we are also part of that system. The way that we do our projects very nicely matches with this very simple idea of scaling is higher adoption, because it's very easy. You can say, okay, well, CIMMYT did that, they reached all those farmers. It's focusing on direct beneficiaries, not so much on the indirect beneficiaries, and very much on the short term. So it fits very nicely with how we do projects today and in the past. And if you then want to do it differently, you need to change quite a lot, right? I think Aaron also alluded to that. Next, please. So maybe I'll just take this as the last slide. So I think if you talk about adoption, you're actually talking a lot about scaling out. We use the scaling pyramid. It's based in Mexico City, which is often popular there to talk about pyramids. So the idea that scaling is not just a one-dimensional thing. It's also really about enabling others to scale out with you through changes in policies and other ways of collaboration, etc. So that 1 and 1 is 3. But there's also this very important dimension, which creates actually the stability of the pyramid, that after you're gone, it just doesn't tip over. And maybe you can click one more time, Aaron. That is the idea of scaling deep. So that has a very strong elements of systems thinking in there, that bottom of the pyramid there, that it's really about shifting mindsets and values and practices, so that 1 plus your corazón, your heart, is actually 5. Let me stop there, and then maybe take some questions. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much. It was wonderful to hear you speak. And Leonard and I did have grand plans to talk back and forth, like it was a conversation, but it was nice just to listen. I learned a lot. So thank you. This lecture closes down with thinking through some practical tools, and then who's benefiting from these systems, as Leonard is getting at. and what some of the negative consequences can come from it. And then finally, who is missing? So considerations of different social experiences. And as was mentioned quite a bit, who wins and who loses. And that is our cliffhanger for next week, which is on social differentiation and scaling and the impacts and places to consider social differentiation. Yes, and with that, we'll open it up to questions. And of course, Leonard and I will be here to be with the class afterward. So those that are participating just for the lecture, of course, are free to go, but we can open up questions for the next 10 minutes or so. And I will ask Kristen to moderate some of the questions that came in the chat, if they did.
Yes, we have one from the chat, which Leonard kind of covered, but are there good examples of successful scaling up of environmentally sustainable and socially inclusive technologies? Which, where, and can you share some examples?
I'll happily pass that to Leonard if he has some examples. Otherwise, I know we'll be also talking about this a lot in the coming days. So
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I think there are quite some examples. I'm just thinking now. I'm here in actually a mechanization workshop, and today we heard quite a lot about machinery that is really developed also for women groups. Some are working on solar energy as well, so also dryers, but also grinders. And some of them are doing quite well, but again, it really depends on the context where they are and how they are brought in, and the history of that. So if you just give them at a random locations without really looking at maybe who's going to use it, even things came up like due diligence of, for example, farmer cooperatives. Some farmer cooperatives are also not really maybe ready to absorb these kind of innovations, even if the innovation is maybe not that expensive. But if it is, let's say, a double of their turnover, whatever they're getting, that's also not really helpful, right? So again, scaling really depends on the context again and user. But yeah, there are definitely some really good examples, I think, especially mechanization as well, that are really also very geared towards women.
Yeah, and just to add to that, some innovations are practice in nature. So we have worked in Honduras on farmer field schools that are engaging women specifically with childcare services, food provided in communities where they work, so that they don't have to travel. And that has been really successful in bringing in more women to understand practices where that they might be just sort of systematically excluded because of the way extension is being relayed. So that's been a successful example.
Great.
Pim?
And Pim, Pim, go ahead.
Hey, Leonard, thank you so much for your lecture. It was very inspiring and enlightening. I work at the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam, and currently I'm focusing on sale and agriculture, which is still quite scattered and in some contexts quite a niche. And in the next phase for a project I'm working on, we want to look at scaling. And while diving deep into the literature and attending a lot of colloquiums and lectures, I find that within the field of innovation and scaling and technology, there are a lot of different synonyms for similar terminology. So I've heard of horizontal and vertical and diagonal scaling, and now here it's about deep and up. And yeah, it would be nice if we would all speak the same language. So yeah, it's kind of an open question, like what terminology should I use or how to overcome those language and terminology differences.
Yeah, that's a great observation, and a source of great frustration, I think, by many, because even what I said about scaling out and scaling up and scaling deep, others are using it differently. I found this for myself quite useful, but yeah, like you say, I think we have a whole chain. Innovation is also defined differently by people, right? Adoption is maybe more confusing, and then scaling even more confusing. And now people are using transformation as a kind of a keyword for everything. I just try to, yeah, accept it kind of. I don't have the ambition to get to a place where everybody speaks the same thing, because it never has worked. So I think this is something we have to deal with, and you just have to accept it in a way. I think really that's maybe maybe a bit of a cold shower, but I sleep better like that, to be honest, by just saying, okay, well, I have a bit for myself. Okay, I know what this means. I know if people speak other things that, okay, this fits a little bit in my way of thinking. But yeah, it's about explaining what you mean. And then I think, yeah, then you can make sense of it together. But yeah, there's not one terminology, and I think there will never be.
If I can just add to that, I think although it can be very difficult, especially when you're getting into a subject, you will see eventually that it all becomes clear and we're all talking about much of the same thing. But it is also a positive, because it means that more people are joining the conversation. And one thing that I think we have to fight against and or be open to is having just one system of knowledge and one sort of entity that defines the conversation. And so we get more words, of course, to define things as more people come into the conversation and explain it from their own perspective.
Thank you so much.
Great, we'll take one from the chat. How do you measure impacts of scaling from the systemic view?
Yeah, that's also a really a great question, because you do want to go beyond actually the number of people that are adopting it, because actually that is a result of your scaling efforts. You know, you basically put things in place, you change your mindset so that people actually want to adopt some of those kind of innovations and other innovations. So you have to go beyond that. So what we're trying to do is really to look at, okay, well, how many other partners are maybe interested in this, or are also supporting or promoting maybe this kind of innovation, so that you also don't exclude, that you don't only look at one particular innovation, but that you look a little bit more at a set of innovations and a set of changes that they're trying to do. So you really have to venture into this much softer world of slow changes, influencing organizations, and setting basically more enabling conditions for scale to happen rather than scaling yourself, which is not always acceptable by most donors, actually, because they say, no, we want to have hard numbers. But yeah, I think this is eventually where we have to go to. Do you feel that the narratives are maybe changing on a particular topic, right? Maybe on women and mechanization, no? Now you suddenly see women on a tractor in Ghana, or you see that this is promoted. This was not there before. So maybe those kind of things, very soft things, I think they're getting more and more important, and they have to be more and more important than just counting the numbers of adopters that you have during your project. But it's a tough one for people to get around, and but fortunately there's also quite some development in the kind of monitoring and evaluation going on. You have you can look into, let's say, blue marble evaluation, or outcome harvesting, where they don't look at the outputs that come out of it, but really at the outcomes very indirectly. So there's quite some movement there as well, and we need that. But it's a great question, yeah.
Thank you. Jonathan, would you like to go ahead with your question?
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Lennart and Erin, for getting this started and those nice presentation and introduction to this important topic. I think I wanted to make a comment that maybe if you want to, you can respond to, but I'll try. So it seems to me that the way scaling is, and the concept of responsible scaling didn't get, or it's just starting to get traction now, yeah. But things are the way they are because of probably the way research for development work has been funded in the past, and still continues to be funded. So there is some work here, of course, we can do to, of course, try and change the mindset of the researchers or people doing research. But then there is also quite a bit of work that needs to happen, probably also with the donor communities, and sort of try and bring them to this new way of seeing how to fund research for development projects and programs. This is a theory I have, but I don't know whether you have a comment to that and whether you're aware of any efforts or initiatives that are in place to try and also start bringing this to, the donors actually kind of think this way.
Yeah. Well, Erin, I'm just going, unless you jump in, because my mic is all the time open. Okay. Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I one of the things that I'm also a part of is a community of practice on scaling that's led by the Brookings Institute in Washington. And there's a lot of donors are also a member of that. There are about 50 people of the CGIAR are a member. But in that community, we also have a lot of access to donors, and you see the interest in changing that to a much more systemic way of thinking about actually what we are doing. So we actually had an annual meeting a month ago, and one of the topics was, okay, how do you mainstream these kind of things with the donors? It is quite challenging. What you see is that I think foundations, they're probably the first ones that are changing. Skoll Foundation, Co-Impact. We have IDRC, Canada, that are really trying to repurpose whatever they're doing. You see it also some NGOs, CRS, also really looking at Catholic Relief Services, how do you do things at scale? How do you don't create such project dependencies? I recently met somebody from the Bezos fund, and they were saying, look, we want systems change, but we only get these very linear projects from everybody because everybody's kind of brainwashed in that direction, that nobody is creative anymore in saying, okay, well, maybe I cannot measure what we do, but we are at least doing a good process. Have faith in the process rather than maybe in the output. That's it's changing. So I'm quite hopeful, but maybe it's going still too slow. I'm talking a bit more about systems change, but I think responsible scaling is very much part of that. It's really maybe a prelude to that. By also being able to be critical about your own scaling is not easy, also not for a CGIAR institute, right? Because the whole business model has been, we create innovations, they're so good that they will scale, right? So if you then start asking questions about that, you kind of shoot yourself in the foot. So you need also really strong, I think, leadership and willingness of people to also be very self-reflective and be critical about our own work, which is sometimes difficult. No, this also takes some time, and some people that rock the boat, and doesn't sometimes they fall out of the boat also. No? I don't know if that was helpful, but okay, thanks, Jonathan.
Great, thank you. We'll take two more questions from the chat really quickly. This goes back to our previous discussion. How do you, oh, sorry about that. Would scaling up, out, and deep go together?
Yeah, that's a great one that comes back. So yes, you need a balanced approach. And one of the things that I actually often do in workshops is to say, okay, look at these 3 dimensions. Where have you been focusing in the last couple of years? Yes, often on the scaling out, right? We do more. We as organization, we put our technicians in the field and they go to the farmers, etc. Okay, what have you been doing in terms of scaling up? What have you been doing to enable others to do that? Yeah, okay, maybe we worked with the extension agents so that actually we prepared them so that they could go to the field, right? So, okay, then you start to map a little bit. And in the end, you need this balanced approach. You need as much scaling out, maybe as scaling up, but also scaling deep. And that's something you see nowadays, that is still very much lacking. It's very much like, okay, we just do a good project. We pay our partners to scale out, and that's it. No, that's still not good enough. You also have to really understand farmers, why are they taking up these kind of things? What are they leaving behind? No, what are they replacing it with? Maybe whatever they were doing made more sense to them, right? So why would they not go back to what they've been doing? And how can you make sure that this becomes the new normal for them, right? It was normal for a woman to be with her hand hoe all the time on the field. Yeah, that's just how it is. To no, actually, you could actually also hire a tractor that does it much cheaper for you, and the women can do other things. So those kind of things also have to be part of your initiative, and not just, okay, sending out more tractors into the world, doing more hectares. That's actually more of a logistical exercise than really trying to make meaningful scaling. So it's really about the balance between them, seeing also that often we are maybe not good at that scaling deep element. Then you need to really partner with others. Or if you don't, yeah, then your project is probably doomed to fail and be part of that graveyard of many other projects that never really got over that hurdle of scaling.
If I can just add one point to this, and you might have been making it too, but the contextualization of of innovations, and to Leonard's point about the tractor helping women with sort of drudgery, there's also issues around women not using mechanization and not having access to a tractor. So it will get into what are you really trying to change? Are you trying to get more productive agriculture, or are you trying to transform women's experience?
Yeah, I'm sorry about all the tractor issues, but I'm brainwashed here in this workshop that I'm here all about mechanization. So that's why I draw on that.
Yeah,
but yeah, you're right. It's really about, I mean, if you're not able to change the mindset, then probably it was not something good enough, right? So you can also start there. Do you see there's scope for the change that you're trying to make before you start investing a lot of money in running around the country to promote your innovation? So it has to come together, those kind of things.
Great, thanks. And we'll take this last question from the chat. How can you take into account the interest versus need of the direct target local communities that finally implement a certain innovation? And how can you bridge through culture and tradition versus understanding the environmental importance from a broader perspective?
Oof, oof, oof. I have to read that one, I think.
It's a long one. It's from Irene.
Or maybe Irene,
maybe I can expand.
Yep.
Maybe I can, expand. Sorry, I have my camera off because I'm in Egypt, so the Wi-Fi is not really too. But I am working currently on a project where I am trying to implement and scale up possibly an ecological design around permaculture and traditional knowledge, right? And I've been in contact with local communities, and I see that this what we call innovation, which is the permaculture approach or regenerative agriculture, this type of nature inclusive way of farming, or maybe more relevant at the level, but at the very end, it's about getting to feeding their kids and make a profit. So they don't really, like, when I ask you, how can you take into account the interest versus need of the implementation of certain innovations? In this case, I see as innovation the permaculture and regenerative agriculture approach, right? To scale up in a desert ecosystem, how can you take into account the fact that local communities might not be interested in the application really, and the scaling up of this I don't know, way of farming? And also, culturally speaking, maybe they're not really in touch with this permaculture new way of seeing culture. How can but versus the broader environmental importance of permaculture, regenerative agriculture, that is a very hot topic these days. So I don't know, maybe it's a very, very big topic to open up, and I don't know if I'm clear enough actually, so please let me know.
No, I think I got you. I'm just copy pasting something in the chat. It comes back, I think, to that issue of the pyramid, that you have to have that you have to have these three dimensions of scaling, and one of them, the scaling deep, apparently there, that's what you're referring to, is that people are not used to permaculture, or they don't see the need for that. And I think you have to take that very seriously, and you really need to pay a lot of attention to it. I just put in the chat an article, a blog that we made last month about, not only focusing on scaling up new ideas, but really also understanding the current practices, and also helping those practices maybe break down, no, actively, if that is something that the population also basically wants and needs, right? So I think you have to take it very seriously. There is often a kind of like you go back and forth, because people need to see the stuff. They need, seeing is believing. That can then create also that mindset shift and saying, well, maybe this is not bad. But yeah, and if they don't want it in the first place, that's kind of difficult, no? So yeah, you have to kind of iterate, I think, between those kind of dimensions. But taking that resistance to change or serious, I think, is very important. You really need to understand where it's coming from. It came from very unexpected angles, I think, is my experience on that. I don't know, Erin, if you want to add to that.
No, well, I guess I would say that this is where concepts around innovation bundling come in, as well, as you attempt to operationalize scaling deep, quote unquote. Looking at the people that you are hoping will, quote unquote, adopt or use your innovation, and understanding what those barriers are culturally or logistically. I put in the chat that I think risk for different populations, different populations will take on risk differently. And of course, people who are more marginalized might feel more pressure to not try something new, because they just can't risk their families' nutrition, et cetera. So really looking at this core innovation, which is permaculture, and understanding the wraparound innovations that need to occur, or mitigating activities, whether that's financing, education, et cetera, helps you sort of scale in this more robust and community way, quote unquote, deep.
You may want to, I just put in, we have the Scaling Scan website. We now have a very quick and dirty version. Well, it's not yet available, but probably next week, where you can just run through that very, very quickly. And you may get some inspiration of what maybe are those, what a bundle of innovation could look like. What are the areas that are maybe not addressed enough yet? So you can have a look there. Then you can download the workbook. It's called Rapid Scaling Scan. It will be available like a digital tool. We're testing it now, beta version. You've seen it, I think. But that may be helpful also, just to break away maybe a bit of the thinking.
Yeah, with that, I want to thanks to all of our participants. Your questions were wonderful. We hope to see you next week. And thank you so much to Leonard for co-presenting with me and really leading us in this discussion around scaling. So yes, thank you so much. And we will see you soon. Go ahead, Leonard, your closing comments.
No, thank you so much. I think this is a really important topic. And I really enjoyed the series. I actually signed up, and then Erin said, hey, why don't you also speak? So yeah, it shows that I was really interested in this as well. And I think you have some great speakers to listen to. Thank you for your patience, and thanks for the great questions. And yeah, just reach out to me. I can just put my email in the chat here if there's anything. Yeah, I'm happy.